rock chorus.
Yay!
I've lost the will. Oh no, you didn't. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. I'm not going to spend much time up here. I'm just going to simply say welcome to the first official TF Nation panel. Yay! On the subject of GoBots. Okay, so let me introduce two very good friends of mine and two gentlemen who are very, very versed in all of the world of GoBots and rock lords, Mr. Jim Sorensen and Mr. Andrew.
I'll get my Sunday name.
Well, do you want the full one? All right, okay. Andrew Scotsman.
Yeah.
Howdy! Hi! So, I want to start by saying to the inaugural panel of the TF Nation, this is the very first TF Nation, this is the first panel. I am not wearing it because it fell off, but I'm sure, hopefully it's in my room. My badge is number 001, so this is in many respects, the first of, I hope, greatness. And I want to thank David and Billy and Ed and everyone else who's worked so hard to bring this together, and give them a big round of applause.
So we thought, what better way to kick off a Transformers convention than to talk about the toy line that most people really don't like. But Robo Machine beat Transformers to the punch. But it's kind of similar to Transformers in that it's an imported line from Japan. The company's called Poppy, but became Bandai, as you all know if you're Power Rangers fans. I'm sure there's at least one or two of you in the room. Not looking at anyone in particular. But it's the red-headed stepchild that lost the race despite being first to the punch. It was out there, toys. There's not much fictional media which we'll kind of come to as we go along, but thankfully, as the years have gone on, they were watered by Hasbro. Jim's had a hand in that in recent years, which we've talked about at great length. But what I want to do first of all is a little show and tell. So I've got a hand over the mic. Alright, Robo Machine, which is what it was called in the UK to start with, because it was imported from Bandai through Tonka, but initially they didn't actually do any rebranding, so it was never GoBots here. So you'll probably find a lot of mix of European toys have GoBot branding or Robo Machine, and you'll see it's not the most sophisticated of stuff. It's 3-page action adventure stuff where the characters are. It's actually set in Birmingham, believe it or not. Seriously, it's actually in Birmingham. They do destroy a small town near Birmingham. Oh, Cycle does. I'm sure it's in at least one of the issues dotted about. But it was the toy line sort of bizarre in that the characters didn't get named, they were just designated. Then it was friendly or enemy or renegade or guardian. Half of them had no bios, no names on a lot of the toys. But it's a case of, it was Hanna-Barbera, licensed the cartoon in 84.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, you've got it there. Not quite Birmingham, but close.
Yeah, so the Machine Robo in Japan and in the UK was licensed by Tonka, which eventually would become acquired by Hasbro, but licensed by Hasbro. They took these ideas and they applied, it's not all that dissimilar from what happened between Hasbro and Takara, bringing over Microchange and Diaclone. They brought the Machine Robo over, they gave the GoBots branding, they gave them names and personalities, and they came up with the story. And they actually came up with more of that in-house than Hasbro, who did a lot of, who outsourced a lot of that to Marvel. They came up with a lot of these concepts in-house and then licensed it to Hanna-Barbera, which made the GoBots cartoon, which probably many of you are at least somewhat familiar with. You know, the cheesy theme song. And Hanna-Barbera being Hanna-Barbera, they did a very sort of Hanna-Barbera job with it. They had the same set of characters that would come in every episode and then bring in other ones as guests, rather than Transformers, which tried to feature a more of a rotating cast.
It's also bizarre that GoBots cartoon got representation a lot better than Transformers did. There wasn't a token female Transformer or GoBot in pink. They were just female or male characters that looked like robots. and there was just not a song and dance made about them. And you also had, in terms of Transformers in the cartoon especially, is a little bit on the white side, to be fair. But its AG in Hanna-Barbera is African American.
Can we show those models?
Have you got them?
I mean, I emailed them to you. I don't have it printed out or anything.
You did?
I did.
No, I don't have them. Oh, on Facebook Messenger. Right.
Yes.
No, you'll just have to get my phone later. We're not in the main hall, so it's not the most advanced high-tech setup. We do actually have models which we can show you.
Fair enough. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting. That's an interesting difference that you had for Hanna-Barbera. You had 3 human main characters, one of which was female, and she was black. I think that's an interesting choice, and one that I think it would take a long time for Transformers to really match.
Yeah, because it was certainly not the original run, because we all know about the stuff with Casey Kasem walking off because of the portrayal of Abdul Fakati in Series 3.
Oh, sure.
And so not quite. I don't even think it would probably be animated, probably, actually, to be fair.
Well, animated, sure. I mean, Sari and her father were Indian, so that, and then that's, and I guess it would be the Unicron trilogy really that would start introducing female human companions regularly,
and more female Transformers as well, rather than Beast Wars sort of did it, but
yeah, I mean, Beast Wars.
You've got a planet of them, basically.
Sure.
You've got Velocitron and whatever. Someone will correct me. I'm not big on the Unicron trilogy.
Well, basically, the Unicron trilogy is the Hasbro and Takara collaboration, yeah, but in 3 different series, both with its unique animation. There's Marta, which has the cartoon animation, the draw one.
Yeah. Well, as early as Armada, we introduced Alexis. So I mean, that was the first. Outside of Japan, that was the first one that had one of a female as one of the main human characters.
And just the characters were, say, Crasher, who's probably one of the most memorable out of the original cast. It's just women.
Yeah, I mean, we had Smallfoot, who was a regular character on GoBots. On the good side, and you also had characters like Spark. Yeah, Vamp. Vamp was a lot of fun. She was one of the monster GoBots. Wasn't important that she was female at all. She was just badass, hung out with Scorp and Pincher, and kicked a whole lot of ass.
But it's kind of it didn't get, the cartoon actually lasted longer in the UK than Transformers, because it was, for those of us that are old enough to remember, it was on the Wide Awake Club, pre-Timmy Mallet, and then it got whisked away at the end of Series 1. And they just basically went, oh, there's another robot cartoon, let's get GoBots on it. And it lasted longer, so you saw more GoBots than that. I certainly did.
How much of the G1 Transformers cartoon was aired on
terrestrial TV Series 1? Because it went to Sky at that point, which was the cable channel. It was the DJ Cat show, I believe.
Fun factory.
So not a lot of people got access to it, so it was VHS releases only, whereas GoBots was on TV, and there was a lot of VHS releases, but that was it. As you can see, for those of you who sort of flip round, that's your fiction, apart from a couple of annuals and storybooks of questionable quality. And you can pick them up for buttons on eBay. But that was it. And then obviously the film of all films.
Yeah. So GoBots aired in most of it aired in 1985, and then 1986 came along, and they came out with, just like the Transformers, with their own movie. The production quality considerably lower. Nobody's ever really figured out exactly if they just found out Transformers was doing a movie and they decided to rush out their own effort, or if they made it maybe as a pilot for a Rock Lord show that never went anywhere. I tend to think probably the former, just because the way the movie's structured, there aren't any obvious act breaks that you would have expected if it was a TV show that was later repurposed as a movie. So it feels like it was produced as a movie.
Yeah, and it's not really got any lingering sort of things to hook you for another story. It's an adventure done, it's finished. So it does feel like it was just done for that. And yeah, Hanna-Barbera, the tone is quite interesting in terms of there's no guns in GoBots, it's all hand weapons, you shoot laser blasts.
Which blasters they call them?
Yeah, just blasters.
Yeah, it's fist fight.
They do occasionally carry guns, but it's
You don't really see it. It's just.
Yeah, I remember one where Snoop was carrying a rifle.
Better than me. But it was,
Snoop, another female. Snoop's an interesting little trivia point because it was a female renegade. But what's fun about her was she never was released in the States. I don't know if she was released in the UK or not, but she wasn't released. She was?
I bought her in the UK from John Lewis about 35 years ago.
Oh, neat. So, but in the States, she wasn't released with the GoBots branding. She only came out as part of the Machine Robo line.
yeah, so the UK was just a glut of it. You could get GoBots, Robo Machine, and there was a lot of grey imports coming all the time. Because I was an army brat, so I got GoBots in 83, well, Robo Machine in 83. So long before I had the Transformers. But even just in terms of the toys, the execution of what they did then compared to Hasbro are doing now, which is same character, multiple size scales, which Hasbro never touched until recent years. It was always just, you've got your Optimus Prime, your Bumblebee, now you've got your Legends, whatever class, your Deluxe, Voyager, all the way. Robo Machine and GoBots kind of led the way with that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Optimus and Bumblebee specifically, since they're some of the few characters that did have multiple toys in the original G1 run.
But it was always the same, that scale, so it was kind of you didn't get a mini Optimus Prime or that. So, whereas you got your oversized Cycle and Leader 1 and all that. And the toys are quite fun. All the early ones are certainly die cast and stood in for a lot of Transformers for most of us because they're cheaper.
I think that's one of the things people forget when they're making the comparison of the Transformers toys to the GoBots or Machine Robo toys, is that the Machine Robo toys were all about this big and they all sold for about $2. I don't know what they went for.
3-4 quid. It was proper pocket money toys back in the day.
So probably the most apt comparison for your GoBots, most of the average ones, not the larger ones, would be someone like Bumblebee or Cliffjumper, one of the really small toys. I think they stack up quite well. Another thing I always liked about GoBots is the variety of vehicle modes that they had.
Yeah, there was World War II, submarines, biplanes, a Rolls Royce.
Battleships,
Yeah.
garbage trucks.
Some of the Japanese ones even had bullet trains and Saturn V rockets.
Oh yeah, I love the Apollo Robo.
Yeah.
He's great.
But it was just sort of, it hit the UK first, but just fizzled out. It never lasted the pace. I mean, the movie was designed to, I think, kickstart it, but...
You think?
Yeah.
Or capstone it.
Yeah, it was the capper on it. Again, you had GoBots magazine. There was a quarterly thing in the US. Again, scans are available.
I think they only made, 5 or 6?
5-ish, I think.
Yeah, so that didn't last a whole long time. But, they end with the Rock Lords movie, which introduced this whole new subline, actually 2 really, because it had Rock Lords and Gnarlies, which was rocks that turn into robots. And I think based on sort of the bios, which interestingly enough, most GoBots didn't have bios outside of a few of the gift sets, but the Rock Lords did, and they tended to focus on things like what kind of rock they turned into. I think that they might have been going for sort of the rock collector. This one is dolomite.
Yeah, as you say, GoBots have no bios, and it's the comic has a slightly different take from IBC, where it's still the same thing. There were humans initially that became machines, but you've got a character called Strong Domes, who becomes Zod Monster later on, because the writers are lazy, and takes them to Birmingham to conquer the Earth. So, again, it is bizarre. It is properly Birmingham.
Yeah. Well, where else would you start the
I know, it's the UK sort of thing, but last it was 2 serials. It was obviously meant to continue, but the license expired and it wasn't worth the money for IPC to continue with it. And Ego, to be honest, didn't last in that current format much past when it ended anyway. It's a whole tale of UK comics.
For whatever reason, I'm just absurdly reminded of the one episode of Headmasters where they show England, and of course it takes place in 2011, which is the future, and it's castles and people.
Is that the Japanese cartoon, right?
Yeah, Headmasters. Yeah, the one that they did back in '87.
But it's a case of GoBots and the like. Just sorry.
Headmasters was meant to be a continuation of the G1 series, but the episode with the headmasters in the American G1.
Yeah, the rebirth.
The rebirth. That was cancelled out, and Takara placed it with a TV series.
Yeah, they ignore those and they start up when they end the Return of Optimus Prime.
They do 2010 rather than season 3.
Yeah.
So, no, but GoBots was one of my finest things, which you won't all be able to see, is it actually got the UK's biggest comic back in the day, 2000 AD, had to give out a space to basically advertise the toys it could win. With Kevin O'Neill, who, if you're into comics, very good, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Nemesis, and he sat and got paid to do that and made to do it to advertise it. So, yeah, Judge Dredd gets bumped from the cover for a week to how fighter, cycle, and the like.
2018, comic a bit adult.
Yeah, that's well, no, it's kind of a bit more all ages at that point, but yeah, it did skew towards the adult, which is bizarre considering the Robo Machine is not, even then wasn't really a sort of older kids toy, it was for young kids, because it was pitched as pocket money cheap plastic die-cast toys, which were great fun.
And this being a Transformers convention, I think one of the interesting bits about GoBots is that it was eventually, that Tonka was eventually purchased by Hasbro, and thus much of the GoBots intellectual property is owned these days by Hasbro. In fact, if you buy the on-demand GoBots discs, the whole series, minus the movie we're going to watch in a few minutes, has come out on burn the disc on demand from Warner Brothers, and they have Hasbro copyright notices all over it, which is fun. But because of that, GoBots, pretty much as it exists today, is mostly only a Transformers subline. So almost as soon as they bought it, they came out with a character named GoBots, a little toy that squirted water in the Generation 2 line. And then they came out with a subline called GoBots that was sort of Hot Wheels style racing cars.
Yeah, the G2 all sort of slightly smaller, sort of Legends class, we would see now. And then they tried to relaunch it in 2002 with GoBots.
GoBots, sure.
With a really great cartoon.
Yeah, it was what,
four episodes, yeah. Which never made it to air over here, it's just if you bought one of the big rigged trucks, you got the VHS for free with an episode.
Yeah.
Yes, I did buy it. As I walked in, it looked quite seedy going up with this giant intense noise. Who's that for? That's me.
You're not the original. No, I'd be surprised if he was.
Yeah.
And GoBots, the name Leader 1 wound up on a mini-con, as eventually did Copdor. I guess technically he would be a Micromaster, huh?
Yeah.
So, but other than that, there hasn't been a whole lot. There's in-jokes where GoBots, especially Cykill, got killed over and over again for a period of 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it sneaks into a lot of work. He's in War Within. Don Figueroa has him in one of the arena scenes, and you see the dead body with John.
And of course he was in the Worlds Collide storyline in the Armada comic.
Yeah. Again by Don, funnily enough.
I guess Don just likes to kill Cykill. So, and then the Transformers fan club came out with a story called Withered Hope. Well, actually, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. Takara in Japan came out, or rather, eHobby, their online store, came out with a version of 6 GoBots. They originally were going to call them by specific GoBots characters' names, and then they backed off that for whatever reason. I actually spoke to my contact over there and didn't get a straight answer as to why that was. One of the speculations was it was worry about Bandai. Yeah. That doesn't feel right because Bandai doesn't actually have any direct interest in GoBots other than the actual toys.
If they called one, wasn't it not long after they were looking at launching Machine Robo in the States, with the Machine Robo Rescue stuff, which was kind of the same general time frame.
Probably, actually.
Yeah. But I'm not exactly sure what the logic was behind that. There's early promotional images that listed each of the 6. There was reprints of the mini bots that listed each of the 6 of them with GoBots names, which was eventually they were just released as the Dimensional Exploration Team. But when eventually the Transformers fan club picked up that idea and ran with it and had those characters go to their interdimensional hub, the city/planet Axiom Nexus on Cybertron, and have a little adventure. And then one of them went on to get a new toy, a Bug Bite, as part of the Games of Deception storyline and toy line from one of the BotCon sets.
Here's the big name of the first classic bundle.
Do you remember what year that was?
2005.
No.
7 or 5, 6.
Yeah. So they're the third one from the new regime.
Yeah.
And then they let that lie for a little while, and they recently picked up that storyline and are concluding it. A guy named Andrew Hall. Is he here this weekend? No. He was here last year. He's writing the conclusion of that, Spatio-Temporal Challengers, which has a few more virtual mini-bot repaints as GoBots. And I myself got a chance to play around with GoBots for the Transformers Fan Club as part of their online presence. They had some Facebook pages that were written from the characters' point of views, and I got to write Cykill doing his own stories, which took a while to find the groove. We were doing online Q&As, and the Q&As weren't getting exactly where I wanted to, and then sort of we hit on the idea of just telling new GoBots adventures, Hanna-Barbera style, in a text format. And then we made about 65, we did a full season, we made 65 episodes of GoBots having GoBody type adventures where everything at the end of the episode is reset back to 0 and nobody ever really gets hurt, and they got to meet the Harlem Globetrotters, and
So everyone at Hanna-Barbera gets to meet the Harlem Globetrotters.
and we got to do a clips episode where Cykill is describing how Leader 1 was unconscious and remembering things that had already happened. And we did a whole bunch of those, and I got to revisit Rock Lords as well, because I was thinking if there was going to be another season of GoBots after the GoBots movie. You'll see it, but the GoBots movie sort of ends with, and we'll come back and visit sometime. So I'm like, well, why not? So there's episodes where the Rock Lords visit Gobatron, there's episodes where the Rock Lords come to Earth, and of course there's episodes where Guardians and Renegades go to Cortex, the Rock Lords' home planet, to do their good deeds or bad deeds. And in fact, I decided to end the series with a 2-part episode called Combiner Wars, where the GoBots go to Cortex, and they have their big fight, and it involves all the different GoBots combiners. There's Puzzler, there was Monstrous, there was the 2 Power Suit guys, and there was Fossil Swords.
The Fossil Lords in there.
Yeah, the Fossil Lords, they got to play their bit. So that's actually one of the fun things about the GoBots toy line was how well done their combiners were. Because if you remember what the Transformers combiners tended, you had Devastator and you had the various Scramble City type combiners. They tended to rely a lot on their kibble. Devastator couldn't form without his kibble, and the other ones could, but they wouldn't have any hands or heads. Or maybe if you were lucky, they'd have the robot's little tiny head on there. The GoBots combiners tended to integrate all the little pieces, the hands and the head and the feet were all sort of hidden inside, which I thought was a nice, clever design.
And Power Suits, just open it, plug your robot in, plug it back down.
The Power Suits, they're kind of an odd, they're kind of an odd duck there, but I kind of like the idea of power-ups for your robots. The Transformers has done that a little bit, but not a whole lot.
Occasionally.
Yeah, there's the occasional suit that they can wear, but not a whole lot. And it feels like a very Japanese sort of, classic, like late 70s, early 80s Japanese robo thing to do.
Again, that's where its roots. And again, Machine Robo Rescue continues on. You can find episodes all online. The Rock Lords are actually in that as well. And they are a little bit bizarre, the portrayal by all accounts. The only image I've seen, so not actually got around to watch them all yet, is there's a lot of little baby boulders. It's very disturbing. And there's a French cartoon where the Rock Lords come out as well. Blue. If Matt Marshall's here, he can probably stand up. Matt, what is it?
Oh my god.
On the spot. Come on, Rock Lords expert.
It's Blue Charm of the Earth, which is Blue Linfum de Terra.
That's it. And the Rock Lords are in that.
They're in that.
It's online as well.
Playing on the beach. 12 minutes straight.
How long is the episode total?
25 minutes. The first half of the Rock Lords play, basically the creators of the show was forced by Bandai to put Rock Lords in it. So the first 12 minutes of the first episode is Rock Lost playing on the beach happily, and then the bad guy runs and they fly away, and that's it. It's well worth watching.
That really feels like they got a corporate mandate saying the Rock Lords must be in the first half of the episode, and they said, well, fine. We'll give you the letter of what you asked, and not 1 second more.
The tiny rock size.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. The rocks, but of course rocks can be any size, right? It's not really a rock size.
But no, and we have, say, a film to show you.
Do you want to go to the film?
And I'll let you up some.
Anybody have any GoBots questions or comments?
Do you think if Tonka continued to release machine robo toys, like Pro Truck Racer and
Sure.
Jetta, do you think that they would have killed Transformers?
Had they kept going as GoBots, you mean? Or?
Yeah, like a Pro Truck Racer.
I think the battle was lost by that point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of speculation as to why GoBots stopped, and I think a lot of that can be found in the original Machine Robo launch. Because if you look, there are very few Machine Robo toys from that era that Takara didn't import. There are a few. Most of the ones from the basic line, that, like you mentioned, the Apollo Robo and then the various train robos, there's a few, but most of them were cars that you could see why someone would look at it and say, oh, an American audience might not like that. It's a car that wasn't released in the States, or bullet trains weren't really a thing in the States, and they're still not a thing in the States. But they hadn't even gotten into the imagination of the average kid. The average American kid in 1980, if you say draw a train, they draw a steam locomotive. They probably wouldn't even be easy.
But they're more complicated robos. I mean, like, as I said, Pro Truck Racer was basically a G1 equivalent of God Magnus.
There's maybe half a dozen characters sort of in that realm that they might have been able to bring over. But even then, it was a toy line that felt like it was in its tail end. And GoBots had branded itself based on being the sort of cheap, easily purchased alternative to Transformers. So, yeah, they probably could have squeezed about maybe another year. It would have been a light year out of it if they had brought those characters over. But they would have been characters that, they would have been characters at a higher price point. So one wonders what the economic value would have been to Takara to doing that.
You mean Bandai?
But, I mean Tonka.
And also it's in the end, like, it didn't make the dent in the cultural consciousness. Transformers hooked people. It was there, and again, they followed the Marvel era with the G.I. Joe, so they'd already got the blueprint for how do we make this toy line collectible and appeal to young boys, which it was aimed for.
Remember what Hasbro did back in the 80s was they brought over virtually all of, and again, you can find examples, especially from Microman. Oh, there's a pair of binoculars we didn't bring over. But most of the ones they didn't bring over, you can kind of see why they chose not to. And what they did, because Transformers was popular enough to warrant it, Hasbro started leading the design side and making their own toys. And still in partnership with Takara, but then the IP was coming, and the ideas were largely coming out of the American side of things, out of Rhode Island, instead of coming out of Tokyo. And that's when you started getting, you had the movie line, which is sort of unique in the G1 run. And those were the only ones that really started with the character designs and moved to toys rather than the other way around, which is why there's such a big disconnect between what Blur or Galvatron looks like in the toy versus what they look like in the movie. They didn't have, especially as sort of Hasbro's first effort at creating Transformers toys, they didn't have the experience or expertise to pull off those sort of looks. These days, someone like Derek Wyatt draws a character in animated, and then the Hasbro and Takara guys, they could get together and manage to make that exact toy, as something that actually transforms, which I think is really impressive. But you can forgive them for producing in '86, which meant they were starting to work on it back in '84, '85. The toys, you could appreciate the challenge that they were under. And then they moved on to Headmasters, Target Masters, Pretenders, things like that. But even they ran out of things to import and had to start doing it themselves. You can see why Tonka decided, well, we had a good run. We imported everything we could. Let's move on to other stuff.
Yeah. And again, it was pitched at a younger fan base as well, where
Well,
Transformers
yeah.
kind of skewed just a little bit older.
Yeah,
Which-
a couple of years. I think.
Which meant you've probably got more of a life cycle in terms of people buying it. Where if it's pitched at younger kids, they're going to, oh, that's kiddie toys leaving behind. So,
I'm just curious, any speculations as to why Hasbro haven't done more with the IP that they got?
Yeah, actually, I put a lot of thought into this, and I've actually gotten to bump up against some of this a little bit, just because, to do GoBots for the fan club, I had to know sort of what the rules were about what were, and they don't tell you why. You don't talk to the lawyers, but you can sort of infer from what you're allowed to do, what they think they own and what they aren't sure they own. So, what I was allowed to use was all the names, all the stories, and I was able to use images that weren't based on Bandai toys. So if you read the Renegade Rhetoric was the name of the column, if you read that, every once in a while there'll be a character design of someone like, we showed off almost the entire, I think the entire human cast we used, and some of the original characters, Tonka original characters like Zod, and some of the original spaceships that would have been made. I think we showed off the Rogue Star, which is the big, the Guardians and Renegades flew around in command centers and thrusters as their main ships, but then the Guardians were based on Gobotron, but the Renegades were based on this enormous sort of aircraft carrier-ish ship called the Rogue Star. So I was able to show that off. So that makes me think that Hasbro has a pretty good ownership or a pretty good relationship with Warner Brothers that now owns Hanna-Barbera and can use those elements. But what they're reluctant to do would be to use anything that can be traced back to Bandai. So Hasbro thinks it owns the name Psykill, or at least thinks it can use the name Psykill without getting in trouble with anybody. But what they couldn't or wouldn't want to, and couldn't and wouldn't want to, I don't know which it is, and it could easily be either. It could easily be either. They wouldn't want to make a toy of a character that looked too much like Psykill. And because there's not that much nostalgia for GoBots, if you can't make Psykill look like Psykill, there's not much point, there's not much money to be had in pursuing that. And they wouldn't want it to be anything other than a Transformers subline. They have a very successful, $1 billion franchise, in Transformers. They wouldn't want to do anything to rock that boat. So they wouldn't come out with GoBots as its own thing. They could, and they have, come out with GoBots as a Transformers subline. But generally when they've done that, they haven't done it with Tonka-y GoBots.
There's also this third-party companies making super detailed interpretations of such said GoBots, or should I say the Machine Robot series.
Robot, yeah.
The action toys, they've got Bike Robo, they have Ego Robo, they've got Tank Robo already.
Yeah, exactly.
Robo.
So and they can do that because Tonka, Bandai owns all those original molds and can make derivative products of them. So Hasbro wouldn't want to do something. They wouldn't want to give free advertiser to their competitors. And Bandai is very much a Hasbro and Takara Tomy competitor. So they're most likely the most that you would expect to get out of GoBots would be using the names occasionally on bodies that don't look much like their original bodies, and what we actually got, which is you could do text story. It's okay to call Psykill in text because nobody's going to be doing that and saying, oh, I have to go get a machine robo. That's about as much as we can do.
I was just thinking I could break it back the kind of story that the re-echo of the Classics Mirage figure they did, there was Crasher a while back. There's the story that, there's the story that kind of the only reason I think kind of the Hasbro kind of higher ups almost signed off on that was because the deco artists were able to prove that there was kind of a real F1 car that had that colour scheme. And that was kind of the only way almost I think kind of like legal, I guess.
Well, I would suggest it probably wouldn't be legal so much as marketing.
Well,
but,
yeah.
I mean, if you look at, nobody's going to get sued over that toy, even if there wasn't one. But I could see why they would want to do it. Why they'd want to have that level of deniability, I think.
Just a quick question. one GoBots character that has seen some life in one shape or form, and he is a person who works with Transformers previously. Derek Wyatt, when he took on Ben 10, and had Crasher appearing in there.
Well, again, that's sort of between Derek and Cartoon Network and their lawyers, but...
They go find that as Festina.
Yes, Festina indeed. And she could fire her fists. They did come off. Or, yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot that was there. But yeah, I mean, he very much borrowed her aesthetic. But again, the fact that he's able to do that means you can see how far you can push it. You know, the truth is most people don't actually get sued, and most of these companies have, at the very least, cordial relationships with each other. There are exceptions, like there are litigious companies out there. I won't name them, but you know they're involved. Rhymes with Bobotech, but but you know most of them aren't suing each other, but they still, you know, they don't want to walk too close. They have no incentive at all to push it, you know, to do anything risky.
For you two, who is your favorite GoBot, personally?
It's always Psycho, just the voice. Just, and again, just the villains are always generally more interesting than kids' cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote, the whole Renegade Rhetoric is written in Psycho's voice. So that gives me a real strong connection to that character. But I have to say, I really like the Monster GoBots. Just, that's not exactly a single character, but just for how generally creepy the designs were and the voices were. And I kind of like that the story, generally speaking, I mean, it's Hanna-Barbera, so it's sort of up and down. But generally speaking, the story managed to make them have an extra layer of menace that I thought was kind of fun. But yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with Psycho. I mean, he's I can hear his voice in my head, and I know how to make him react to any given situation. I kind of like Scooter. You know, I wouldn't call him my favorite, but oh, thank you. No, I mean, if you watch the show, you know, he's the one who doesn't have any weapons and tends to rely on his wits, and I think they do a competent job with that. I can see why you'd like him when you're 6, and I can see why he'd become uncool when you're 11. But having gotten past, you know, as I'm no longer 11, I'm at least a couple years older than that. You know, I can kind of see why he's an interesting character to write, and more interesting than virtually everyone else. Who's, you know, when they see an obstacle, they're going to raise their fist and fire a blast, or maybe stomp their feet and send off a cool lightning blast.
Yeah, it's more interesting when you can't just use an easy out.
Yeah, exactly, and he has that. So not only is he smaller and more relatable, but he has that extra dimension of being more clever and having more utility.
Certainly Turbo's not exactly much for anything.
No. Time to go! Which is the name of this panel, I think, technically. Is it?
I believe so.
Yes. Any other questions?
Apart from when are you showing the film?
Well, I think that's what we're wait.
Andy, I'm very interested in rock laws. This weekend, is there any way for me to find out about rock laws? Maybe.
Yeah, I wonder you should mention that. Anyone who wants to go to the Toy Food stall, and why wouldn't you? Because it's all for a good cause. There are rock lord fanzines there, and also, how many exactly rock lords?
I've got 100 rock lords.
Yeah.
There aren't 100 rock lords.
Some are doubles. Some are very interesting, varying colours between Euro releases and US releases, which if you stand in daylight, you squint really carefully. You can see there is a very, very slightly different shade of gloss. But it's a true rock lord fan who also agree.
May I ask, do you have all the gnarlies here as well?
Yes,
Oh, that's it. You know, we didn't mention that. I briefly alluded to it when I said, you know, that the Rock Lords brought in 2 new franchises. One of them was Rock Lords. The other one was the Gnarlies, which were little animals with fuzzy hair that
rocks.
would roll, and their jaws would go up and down, or their tail would go up and down. And they actually had a Rock Lords vehicle, one that you could sit the characters in and drive. But if you mount a Gnarly onto that, then they'll do their action feature as the Rock Lord rolls around. And I got to specifically incorporate that action feature into my, I described them driving in the Rock Lords, and I said, and I guess the hog, the gnarly hog, whatever one it was, the gnarly hog sat on it and was, sniffing the air. So I got to write that out, because I figured, yeah, if you were doing this as a cartoon, you'd get all your action features into it, so why not? So cool, I'm glad you have the gnarlies. Another question?
Which would you say was a better leader, Psykill or Megatron?
Depends. Megatron, are we talking cartoon or
You're talking about G1 cartoon thing.
Cycle hands down.
Why is that?
Megatron just always is retreat. That's the quote opposite. Megatron set to go on retreat.
But to be fair, so does Psycho.
Not as much.
He doesn't say Megatron.
He just always seemed more cowardly.
But there was one episode where Psycho did believe he could pick out mountains of people. He did go one episode he kept all the Earth and humans and the bombs, and he didn't know that intent not even switched them. So as far as he knows, he's got to fall for the mountain of people, crushes it, kills them.
I kind of feel like Megatron in the cartoon would be fine with killing people. I kind of feel like he didn't, mostly because of sort of narrative fiat. I never got the sense that he had any moral problems killing them, and some of his actions would realistically probably have resulted in human death. I mean, the ultimate doom, right? He brings the planet into orbit and makes massive disasters. You have to assume if there's one scene of the Dinobots stopping a tidal wave, there's got to be 99 scenes of tidal waves where there's no Dinobots, where oh, well, that building got, that's too bad. So, although to be fair, I think the GoBots pilot, which was 5 parts, versus the Transformers 3-part pilot, I think the GoBots pilot actually compares pretty well to it. The Transformers pilot, what Transformers does much better is sort of acknowledge that robots on an alien planet probably wouldn't turn into Earth vehicles, although oddly they sure look like they do. But GoBots they just are randomly turning into Earth vehicles on Gobotron for no good reason, which I explain in the course of my work. I did that way back in the Allspark Almanac when I have the second one. Where Tux, there was in Transformers Animated, there was a limousine that was based on the GoBot Tux/Stretch. He was named, which one? He was named Tux in the cartoon and Stretch on the toy. And so his limousine, Courtesy Powell's limousine, had in the Allspark Almanac, we designed him as an animated character, and Derek drew a new head for him. And he, the conceit was he had a little Allspark shard, and he came to life, and he eventually wound up on Gobotron, so he sort of became that GoBot, and he went back with a copy of the Porter C. Powell Motorworks database. So ancient Gobotron would have had access to all the Earth vehicles. So that's because I'm a nerd. But anyway, so the GoBot. Other than that sort of pretty big flaw of them all turning into Earth vehicles before they ever went to Earth, I think it holds up quite well. The stakes are a lot higher. They come to Earth, they steal a MacGuffin, they use it to mind control everyone on Earth. They build a giant fleet of super weapons, super Zods that are going to be flying to Gobotron to conquer it. I mean, it's pretty scary. There's images of sort of every human on Earth hunting down the last 2 Guardians. Leader 1 gets seriously injured and captured and almost killed by Psykill. It feels like the Autobots are never in that much jeopardy over the 3-part opening Transformers, and the ultimate goal that Megatron has is to steal all Earth's, lots of Earth's energy and then leave. And he succeeds in stealing all Earth's energy. They don't stop him from doing that. So all the bad stuff from Earth's perspective happens anyway. All they do is shoot down a ship at the end. So it feels to me that the GoBots pilot is sort of more menacing in a way, although they also had 2 more episodes to do it with.
So I grew up on GoBots, and hence I've still got the VHS tapes back at home in these little cases. But also, the other thing that made Transformers and GoBots different was GoBots. The bad guys actually had those monsters that turned into vehicles. that were actually not piloted. They were actual sentinel beams, which just anything they came across.
Yeah, you mean like the ships, like Thruster?
Yeah, those like monster type vehicles.
Yeah, the monster GoBots.
Yeah, so they didn't actually have an actual separate name, so just called monsters. So, or just remember the one episode where either one had to siphon the energy from the robots just to survive.
Oh, it was one of the Zods, maybe?
Yeah.
That happens where he does that. So. But yeah, Scales was a big F1 race car that turned into a big monster. So they had those. Bye, man.
He'll be back. He's going to be watching the film.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
Given his obsession.
I think Megatron probably, just going back, I think Megatron probably is the better leader as portrayed. Psykill.
No, because Megatron basically is like Starship trying to betrays him every week and he lets him go.
Well,
there's none of that. Basically, you follow Psycho's lead.
That's true. The
That's
one
it.
episode where Psycho gets betrayed, he exiles the guy. He doesn't come back, which is nice.
There's no messing.
Yeah, but Psycho always feels. Psycho seems to berate his troops for not much of a reason. Megatron. I mean, I could be wrong. I feel like Megatron didn't do that as much. It felt like Megatron. It felt like there was maybe more camaraderie among the Decepticons. But
One thing I will give Transformers over the GoBots is, at least the Transformers had the episodes seem to have a sense of continuity. You get to an end of the GoBots episode, that would never sort of carry on into future episodes that we reference again. I mean, at the end of the 5-part, Brax is being arrested, and that's never brought up again.
well, to be fair, they did break Brax's out of jail. But I would say Transformers doesn't have much more continuity than Go. I'd say it has a little bit, but I think you could probably count the number of Transformers episodes that really have legitimate continuity on two hands. And some of them contradict each other. I mean, you have an origin for the Insecticons, you have an origin for the Constructicons, more than one. You later have an origin for the Technobots, but not the Terracons. You have an origin for aerial bots and Stunticons, and the Combaticons, but not the Protectobots.
Dark Awakening Offspring is half himself blown up, then it turns out Offspring looks quite shiny.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some episodes that do introduce continuity, but not much. Most Transformers episodes can be watched in any order other than, from season to season. And GoBots has, GoBots does actually give origins to certain characters. They tended to put most of those in their 5-parters, but there are episodes where GoBots say, "Oh, here's a new character, here's a new thing, here's a character's backstory." It feels fairly comparable to me in terms of continuity.
And kid shows like that, because it could be shown out of sequence at any point in time, so
Yeah.
continuity is not really a thing that they wanted.
That's probably why it did well on TV, then.
Yeah, it might have been one of the reasons. It didn't feel compelled to introduce a whole lot of concepts. And there's
I was just going to add on to something you had said about how Megatron doesn't seem to really berate his troops as much. I think it's a bit more one-sided with the more color-coded Decepticons. Like, he has his favorites, like Laserbeak and Soundwave, who he can never give an endless amount of praise to. But then you've got your obvious whipping boys, like a lot of the time Constructicons, and of course Starscream, who's usually the butt of every joke when it comes to Decepticons.
Yeah, that's a weird. I mean, if you're looking at it objectively, that's a weird dynamic to have someone who has announced that they want to usurp you and has tried to kill you in the past, and to keep them around and to more than once.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Enter the Nightbird and Starscream's Brigade. I mean, this has happened on more than one occasion. So to keep him around and berate him, it seems like you either just get rid of him or you try and win it back. And that was something that I think Transformers Prime did really well. Transformers Prime has the best Starscream arc.
I will just add that Prime, I've never really enjoyed Starscream's character up until Prime.
I think he was fun in animated until they just until they didn't know what to do with him. He was fun. He was fun the first season when he was sort of running around on his own. He was fun the second season when he was doing his plotting. I think the problem came when they cut off his head and didn't. It's like, okay, well now Starscream's hanging around with Megatron's hanging around with Starscream's wacky head. Oh, look, he's a target master now. It's like, yeah, that really felt like a misfire.
I mean, yeah, that particular dynamic is strange, but I just mean to say, like, to the point of the conversation was that, like, I don't know, I think it's maybe, depending on what way you look at it, there was obviously, like, just more, there are some sounds that obviously were always the butt of a joke, and Megatron was always just ravaging right into them. But there was always his favorites. I think it's just, depending on which ones you look at, like, Megatron wasn't exactly, like, supportive of his whole cast.
No, that's fair. I'm not saying Megatron was. I'm just saying Starscream seems, Psykill seems to just routinely, oh, you failed. You dunderhead! Just over and over. He doesn't seem to have. It's hard to, if you actually put yourself in the shoes of one of the renegades, it's hard to imagine why you'd want to follow this guy. Megatron feels like he has more. They both have charisma, but Megatron feels like he actually uses it on his troops, whereas Psykill's charisma mostly seems to be the sort of, I'm chewing the scenery! Any last questions? Oh, yeah.
Do you think that since Transformers has had the same treatment, that GoBots would work well in live action?
Can't do worse.
Define word well.
I mean, given the legal realities of who owns what, it just seems very unlikely that Hasbro would ever choose to greenlight it. Could you make a good GoBot? Of course you could. I mean, you could, you could take Battlestar Galactica, a really cheesy 70s science fiction show, and cut down to its core concept of fleeing an apocalypse and make that really compelling. I mean, you could do GoBots. You could do GoBots as the horror of, oh my God, our planet is being bombarded by asteroids. We have to put ourselves in metal bodies, and then when they do, the terrorists responsible. I mean, you could do it really horrific, or you could do it. You could play it for laughs. I mean, it could be anything. But honestly, almost any property could be good or bad. There's a scene in The Producers where they're trying to find the worst play ever so they can commit insurance fraud, and they're going through and they're rejecting scripts for plays because it's too good. And one of them he goes is, a man wakes up and discovers he's turned into a giant cockroach. Too good. It rejects it. Of course, I mean, that's Kafka. And that's the whole point is, yeah, that sounds awful, but it's brilliant. And it's all in the execution. So yeah, of course GoBots could be a good movie, but it won't because Hasbro wouldn't let it. Maybe it's less, it's still very unlikely, but it's remotely possible that Bandai might choose to do a live-action Machine Robo movie. That could happen. They did a pretty decent one out of Battleship Yamato, so that could happen. But it wouldn't be GoBots as GoBots. I don't think.
Are we at any point going to address play school GoBots?
Hold it. Do we have to? Oh, they were great. Well,
Okay, great, thank you.
Times of it. No, they were. Was that be Aerobot or was that the monkey one? I'm trying to remember. It was about. Yeah, and the little. Yes, and you had the 8 primal one, the monkey one that basically you split his bottom legs apart in a horrific way to turn him into a robot. Unsettling, but as you can see, that's why Play School GoBots kind of shuffled off the mortal coil very, very quickly.
So now we've acknowledged them.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. More GoBots questions? Comments? Right, I think maybe we should watch a GoBots movie.
Yay!